So welcome to another episode of Women Petpreneurs podcast with your host, Mary Oquendo. So what I wanted to talk about is life outside of grooming. Yes, we have lives outside of grooming and some are more interesting than others, which is why I have Patsy Tallant here. Okay. So thank you, Patsy, for being here.
Love it.
So let's start off with first at how you got involved in the pet industry.
Shortly after my father passed away, my mother decided that I could get my own little dogs. So I went and bought a miniature poodle with my own money because I thought miniatures were the smallest. So that was my first oops. But anyway, fell in love with the mini poodle, learned how to groom it myself at 14 and a half years of age. And decided that I just absolutely loved the career, kept working on the weekends. And then I ended up during high school and college. I worked every weekend in the kennel. And before long, I left college, left my nursing career behind and became a full-time stylist.
Cool. Very cool. So now, like I was saying, some of our outside lives are more interesting than others. And I had put up a post on my Facebook page saying, hey, I wanted to do a series on, some interesting things you were doing. And I was not disappointed. Okay. So Patsy, what do you do for fun?
I do DNA genealogy. So that just means that I'm a genealogist by nature. And then now that DNA has come about, I am able to put the DNA together to prove or disprove any facts that's in my genealogy.
All right. Give me an example.
Okay, so I am adopted and I've always been interested in genealogy on my biological side and my adopted side. So my birth mother would never tell me who my biological father was. So when DNA became available, I decided to do DNA. Within a few minutes of getting my results, I knew who my father was. He had passed away, but one of my half siblings was on there. And so she was able to put all the pieces together that I'd been waiting for 55 years. So with that being said, I went from having one adopted sister to 12 biological half siblings.
Wow.
Yes. And then that transpired into me continuing the DNA search. Well, I really got interested in the DNA, tagging it and putting it together with my genealogy when I figured out really, really quick that my biological grandfather on both sides, maternal and paternal, was not the person expected. That's called an NPE, not parent expected. And so I thought I didn't wait 55 years to find out my biological history to only have it end at my parents. So I went on a quest and have gotten very, very good at it. I now manage 17 people's DNA that I am helping them do searches on. And I help any adoptee that has any issues when wanting to search. So you're able even to find grandparents and great grandparents just by matching up the DNA matches that you have from living people.
Okay. So in your case, how far back were you able to go?
Depending on which grandparent I'm speaking of, anywhere from the mid 1800s to the 1500s.
Wow.
Mhm. And I'm constantly working on it. I try to log in at least 5 to 6 times per week on my DNA sites because there's always something new or, a new relative. It's been a little boring lately. Haven't had any high matches, but the little ones sometimes are great too because they can actually confirm relatives based upon the DNA.
Wow. That's really fascinating.
It's really cool. It's a lot of fun. And I've been very blessed. All of my siblings are very successful in life. And I have at least I know all of them. I have met every single one of them, and I'm closer to some than others, but it is a challenge at 55 to 60 years of age to start forming a sibling relationship when you have no past.
All right. So in your case, the 12 siblings,
Mhm.
did any of them know of each other, or was this like a bit of shock to everybody?
Um, my biological mother's side, I have known longer. They did not know about me until the early 90s. My birth mother still keeps me a secret because she was married to her husband at the time I was born, but he was overseas. She became pregnant while he was gone, had me, gave me up for adoption before he returned home. He does not know to this day that I am his wife's daughter. He
Okay.
knows me, he just doesn't know who I really am. And then my biological father's side, they were not very shocked. My biological father has 8 siblings with 7 different women. And I'm sure there's probably a few more out there lurking around that we just haven't found yet. It's very interesting. So no, they were not surprised, but there ended up being 3 of his children were given up for adoption, and we know that he only knew of one of us, of the 3 adoptees.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I, I know of a lot of adoptees, and there was one instance where even my parents were almost certain that that this kid had been given up by someone in our family.
Mhm.
Okay. Have since lost track. So at this point, honestly, it's neither here nor there. But how often does that like really happen? I mean, yes, people giving up, like in the case of your mother, who was
Mhm.
married, husband was overseas, had a kid, gave it up for adoption. I
Mhm.
mean, um, and then kind of went on with life.
Yes, actually, I am part of what's called the baby boom era, which was the mid 40s to the late 60s. That's back when the war times were going on, and there was a lot of children being born into different circumstances. It was also a time when it was still not it was frowned upon to be pregnant outside of marriage. And they were forced to some of them were forced to give up their children. Some of them felt they had no choice. It was very, very common. A lot of the people never talked about it. So a lot of surprises have been coming up since DNA because these children are now able to test and get the truth. And so I think it's more accepted now, but it's fairly common. I would say probably every family in the United States has an adoptee floating around out there somewhere, whether they
Oh,
know about it or not.
no, no, I kind of agree with that.
Mhm.
So when you were doing your own testing, and so you know who your parents are, but then only to find out that
Grandpas were not who they
grandpas were not grandpas.
exactly. Um, the first one took me about 9 months to figure out. And that one was because I don't feel like I feel like my birth father had no idea that the guy that raised him was not his father, which was also very common back in those days. And especially, there was no way to know. So unless there was a mixed race there, there's no way to know that it was somebody else's kid. So it was pretty common. And then with my biological or my maternal grandfather, it took me about 2 years to figure out who he was. Reason being is there was quite an age gap, and there was also some family mixing of names. And so the names kept coming up, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense. That's not on the right side of the family. And it's because my biological grandfather was my great aunt's husband. So My great aunt's husband slept with his niece-in-law, who is my grandmother. Yeah, and I always tell people when they're doing DNA, you need to go into it with an open mind because you are going to find some surprises. DNA can add branches to your tree. It can also take away branches. That happened on my husband's side. He had a half aunt who we've known his entire life, but come to find out when she did the DNA, she was not his grandfather's child, but she was raised as the grandfather's child, has his name and everything, but that wasn't who her father was. So obviously she's still Aunt Jeanette, but biologically she's not. So I always tell people, just be prepared because it can be an emotional journey and you have to be prepared for it.
Right. So let's say someone's listening to this and they're an adoptee and they want to contact you regarding this. How would they do that?
Absolutely. You're more than welcome to give out my information. All of my information is on Facebook, including my phone number. So I'm always willing to help any adoptee who's wanting to search or any birth parent that's wanting to search.
Okay. And typically, what is a service like that? What does that run somebody?
If you go through ancestry.com, it's very expensive. Like I think they start at $2,500. Most of us that are what we call search angels, we do our searching for free. If I get really involved and I have travel expenses or we have something outside of the ordinary, then, I just ask for reimbursement on that. But because that is my passion, that's my heart, I've been in these people's shoes. Everybody deserves to know where they came from. And, most people, when they go searching, they're well into adulthood. And that should never be kept from anybody. We are the only segment of the country that our rights were stripped away from us as an infant and have never been restored. A lot of people think that an adoptee, when they turn 18 or 21, has the right to go get their original birth certificate, and that is not true.
All right. So besides doing DNA, what is involved in doing this? So let's just say I'm adoptee and I go to you and I say, hey, I want to find my birth parents. What's the walkthrough on that? How does that conversation start?
Today's times, I would tell you DNA.
Okay.
Back when I was doing my initial search back in the early 80s, I had to do lots of old-fashioned detective work. Go to the hospital where I was born and pretend to be looking for medical records and never, ever, ever say the word birth parent or adoptee because they'd shut the door on you.
You're right.
And you just things were a little different. You could go in and say, I'm looking for medical records for XYZ reason. And they would try to go find them for you and give them to you. And you'd hope there was a name on there. You would search through databases like the city directories at the library. We did anything and everything we could. If it was an adoption agency, you hope and pray that you get someone that has compassion and will give you some information, but that was very rare that you actually got information. And if you did, a lot of times it was fake. They would change the names, the birth dates, all kinds of information just to throw you off. So DNA is the way to go these days because it's readily available and there's no lying. It's the truth. And you get to it pretty quickly.
Okay. So there's several companies that are out there.
Yes.
DNA.
Yes. If you are an adoptee or a birth parent, I always recommend you start with Ancestry if you can only do one. It has the largest database. If you are looking, if you're really wanting to be serious, you need to test on all three of the major ones, which is number 1, Ancestry, number 2, 23andMe, number 3 is MyHeritage. MyHeritage is usually just a backup. Sometimes it can verify things, but most people are testing on Ancestry and 23andMe.
Okay.
And so you want to have your your finger in every pie that there is if you're an adoptee or a birth parent, because like one of my half siblings is on 23andMe. All the rest of them are on Ancestry. And I have a half aunt on 23andMe. The rest of them are on Ancestry. So it just depends on where they test. And if most people, if they're not testing because they suspect there is somebody out there that they want to find, they're just testing to see if they're Irish or, African or whatever the case may be. And so they only test in one place. So adoptees and birth parents must test on all three.
Okay. All right. All right. Can you share some stories with us?
Sure. Like, I've helped people find birth parents, siblings, adopted, they know for a fact that their sibling was adopted out. Their mom told them, hey, when I was younger, before I married your dad, I had a child. And I helped one lady who was just adamant that she find her big brother. She had always wanted a brother. Her parents only had girls, but she knew that they had a big brother. So we started looking. It took us about 6 weeks once she got her results back. He had never tested, but his son had tested. So it showed up as a half nephew to her. So we had to go through LinkedIn to find him, because this young man was on LinkedIn, and that was the only way we found his name. It was unusual. And so it took him a little while to answer back, because not everybody checks LinkedIn every day unless you're looking for a job or something. So he finally got the message and he reached out, and he had always known that his dad was adopted, and he did the test just to find out what nationality they were, because his dad was interested but not really interested. But when he found out that he had all these sisters, he got his dad connected to his aunts. And it was a very emotional story. I got to be there when they all met. And there was lots of tears, lots of hugging. They really looked a lot alike, which that is something that most people take for granted, that they know somebody that looks like them, maybe Aunt Susie or, somebody they kind of mirror. But adoptees don't have that. They don't mirror anybody until they meet their biological family.
Okay. That's an interesting point, because I remember when I was in college, I had a friend come up to me and she was yelling at me because apparently I was rude to her for not waving at her when she was waving at me someplace else. And I'm like, but I wasn't there. That wasn't me. She goes, no.
Oh.
And she's like, why did you change your shirt? Again, wasn't me. She said it was like she looked exactly like me. So what does that mean?
They say everybody has a doppelganger. But
That's true too. But you know what? It was in an area that had a lot of family.
Yeah, it could have been a cousin or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
me and one of my sisters look a lot alike. And I was able to go a couple weeks ago to my biological grandfather's cousin reunion. And one of the ladies that was hosting it turned around and my jaw hit the floor. She looked exactly like my birth mother, but just a different color of hair. Her mannerisms, everything. So she was the first cousin to my mother. And I had to apologize. I said, I'm really sorry that I keep staring at you, but I said, you look just like my mother. And so it's interesting when that happens. And then my adopted sister is also my biological cousin. That's a whole nother segment, a whole nother story. But she did her DNA and we were able to find her half sibling that we knew was out there. And we were able to find her birth father, who her biological mom was not able to tell us who it was. She had a lot of health issues and really couldn't remember. She remembered some things, but they weren't all accurate. But we were able to find him, and he was very elderly. He was much older than the birth mom. But it was really funny because I told my sister, I said, look at your hands and look at your feet. Now look at Bob's. And it was just like a mirror image. And so she found out why she was so short, why her hands looked the way they looked, why her feet were so short and stocky, and just things that, most people take for granted that adoptees don't have, because you don't know who you get that characteristic from.
Yeah. So I read somewhere years ago that countries like Germany and other countries, like if you could prove you were German, all right, then you can start the process for citizenship there.
Yeah. And this goes with a lot of different things like Indian heritage, even people that want to be a member of DARS, Daughters of the American Revolution. Some places are starting to realize that they are going to have to acknowledge DNA because it's proof. Some organizations are still not willing to do that yet. And I don't have a list of who does and who doesn't. But I know that Daughters of the American Revolution is talking about it pretty heavily. It's now that they're getting some younger people in there, it's becoming more open. The older ones didn't want anything to do with it because if it wasn't written on paper, they didn't want to hear it. But unfortunately, their paper is starting to get proved wrong with DNA, so they're kind of having to listen.
That's interesting. I mean, like a lot of people, especially when you're not where your family originated from. All right.
Mm-hmm.
That you just kind of wonder where you would be, who your family would be if they had stayed where they were.
Exactly. And a lot of adoptees, though, amazingly grow up usually within 100 miles of their family. And I would say probably 75% of them are adopted close by. And then it kind of becomes an interesting situation when they start running into each other, when they start figuring out who everyone is. I do have a more current situation that I have been a part of. 12 years ago, a young girl that I knew found herself pregnant, was not in love with the young man, but she wanted to choose adoption. So she knew about me. She got a hold of me. She's my best friend's niece. And we talked a little bit, and I told her the pros and the cons and some of the things that she needed to consider, because things are different now. And this was before public DNA became available, but I said, it's coming. And I said, you're going to have to realize you're not going to be a secret. And, you need to handle that from day one. And so it went well. It's private adoption. She gave the little girl up. She doesn't live far from me. I get to see pictures of her all the time and follow her on Facebook. But her half sister is fixing to move to the same school district as she is. And we're talking a very small town of about 700 people. So I had to call her the other day and I said, hey, I'm just giving you a heads up. How have you had the talk with Abigail? And she was like, we've had the talk. And I said, well, you better have a serious talk, because her sister's fixing to be in the same school as her. And they look very, very identical. It's not going to be any denying that they're sisters. And the older sister, of course, knows about the younger one. And I said, you can't expect that child to not open her mouth. That's her sister. So they're fixing to have to deal with that. And, a little younger than normal, but at least it's better than lying to the child. And she understands that. It's better now. They used to say, don't talk about it anymore. And it's not the case now. It's a little more open.
All right. So as far as like children are concerned, is
Mhm.
there like an age in which they're better equipped to handle this?
I would say 99% of us adoptees are going to say that they should be told, and it should be part of the conversation from birth. It should never be a secret. I work with, and in a lot of groups that are working with what we call late discovery adoptees. And it's traumatic to watch what these people are going through. So most of us adoptees say it should always be a subject. Now, if there's circumstances that maybe you're a little uncomfortable or a little difficult for the child, those need to be handled on an age basis as the child is able to, but they should always know that they're adopted. It's just so much easier on the child. And so some of these late discovery adoptees, and what I mean by that, we're having some, we just had one the other day. She's 78 years old and just found out that she was adopted. Nobody ever told her. So now a lot of the questions that she'd like to ask, she can't ask. Everybody's dead. But thanks to DNA, she's been able to find some things. And actually, her birth mother was still alive. She was 96 or 97. She was a young child. And so that was a miracle in itself. But yeah, adoptees, we feel like we should always know. I have no memory, Mary, of finding out I was adopted. I always knew. It was talked about. I knew I had older siblings through my mother, but we didn't ever discuss where they were at or anything like that. It just, I knew. So it helped in the end.
Right. So what are some of like the Facebook groups that people could join if they're looking to get more information or for that support network?
Oh, there is so many. If they are a late adoptee, there is a LDA, late or LAD, late adoption discovery group. And then there is DNA support groups. There is probably 100. So you just have to kind of Google which one fits you. There's also an NPE, not parent expected. This is a group that's not only for adoptees, but for a lot of people are finding out that the father that raised them was not their father. And so there's a group for them. And there's been some very heartbreaking stories in that as well, because, you know, most of them really loved the dad that raised them, but then to find out that that wasn't their biological father is kind of a slap in the face sometimes. Sometimes the mother did it on purpose. Sometimes it was an accident. She just didn't really know, so she figured she just wouldn't say anything. But there's just a lot of emotion that goes into it. So I just say find a support group that fits your circumstances, or just join one of the basic DNA groups and start, telling your story a little bit, and people will share, oh, your story's a lot like mine, and I'm in this group for this type of situation, and they'll lead you over to the right group.
All right. Well, this is very cool. So, where would you like to see this go, your group go?
I would love to even be able to help groomers that are adopted. I know there's several out there. I won't mention any names, but there's several that have gotten a hold of me. I think it would be really cool if we could start a group of adopted groomers. That's one way I'd like to see it go. The other way is I love helping people that are in the same situation I was, getting the answers that you need. A lot of people think, well, if you always knew you were adopted, or if you were adopted as an infant straight from the hospital, it's better than going through foster care. But through all the DNA and all the research that's gone on in the last 10 years, they have since discovered that the trauma is the same for the infant and the child, whether they were adopted from birth or whether it took place a couple of years later. It's all the same. That primal wound is there. It's born into us. When you're born, you know who your mother is. And even if you're separated and handed straight to another mother, like say the adopted mother is in the room, it's still traumatic to the child. Suicide rate for adoptees. Sorry, I have this dry throat. Suicide rate for adoptees is 6 times higher than the average population.
Wow.
There's also a higher incident of ADHD, anxiety, different things, just because of that primal wound. Here's just not a fun fact, but 90% of adoptees hate their birthday.
Really?
Yes, even if you had the happiest of birthdays ever, there's always like a cloud that you just can't put your finger on it. Every adoptee will say, well, I don't say every, 90% of adoptees will tell you, I just don't really like my birthday for some reason. And it's because it's in your bones that that day something happened to you that was traumatic. Now, I enjoy my birthdays now, but there's a lot of times I didn't. I just was like, okay, it's the day's over. Give me a cake. Let's go. I'm done. I don't want to do anything special. So when I turned 60 this last year, I gave myself a birthday present. I decided I'm no longer a secret. I told my birth mother, I will not keep your secret any longer. If your husband ever asks me, I will not lie to him. And because she still wants me to lie. And I said, no more. That was my birthday present. And it was very freeing, very, very freeing to me. Now, I've run into him since then. Question hadn't come up. I'm not going to walk up to him and tell him. But if he ever starts asking questions, the truth is coming out.
Interesting. And now, how old is your birth mother and her husband?
Okay, I just turned 60, so she just turned 82 in June. She was 21 and a half when she had me, so she just turned 82. And her husband, I can't remember if he's a year older or a year younger, but it's basically the same age.
Okay. I would imagine that if he had any kind of inkling or suspicion that the conversation might have come up.
I think he has some suspicion, but I think he chooses to leave sleeping dogs lie because he has a past himself. So I think he just doesn't want to drag up anything, but it makes for interesting situations sometimes.
All right. It makes for great stories.
Oh yeah, I have some stories. So.
Okay. So, and then the last thing, some words of wisdom if you're adopted. Pass along a little bit of words of wisdom.
Accept who you are and be willing to explore where you came from and where you could go. It does shape your past, your present, and your future. Don't be afraid of what you're going to find. You know, if you are curious and you want to go searching, don't be afraid of what you're going to find.
Okay.
Embrace it.
Good advice. Because, once I get off this call right here, I'm up on 23andMe, so I'm going to run over there, check all the connections now, because now I'm interested.
So what you have to look for, if you're on 23andMe,
yeah,
they don't give the centimorgans, they give a percentage.
Yes.
And you have to click on the details to get the centimorgans. And the centimorgans are how you determine how closely related that person is. Then there is a website called DNApainter.com. And if you you go to the tools section, it's a free little website. You go to the tools section, you put in that number of centimorgans, and it will spit out a chart that is, I'm telling you, 100% accurate. It will tell you how that person is related to you. And it gets very interesting. There are a few that you're going to see that it'll say maybe 50% chance that it's a first cousin, or a 50% chance that it's a first cousin once removed. It just depends on the centimorgans, but then you work your DNA and you can figure it out.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. So I have to go jump down a rabbit hole now. So thank you.
Okay. It's lots of fun. You have any questions, you could call
I
me.
know
Tell
who
you
to
how to read it.
contact. I know I know
Yes.
who to call. All right, Patsy, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here. I really do appreciate it. This was fascinating. So and everybody join us next week when I interview somebody, another professional pet groomer who's probably far more interesting than me.
Well, you're very interesting, Mary. I appreciate everything you're doing. I just beg any adoptee or birth parent that needs help, please reach out. I am here for you. I've been there, I've done that. And you deserve to have the truth. So just call me.
Awesome. Thank you again.
Thanks, Mary.